Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Alka Halberg. I am part of the Cohesive Marketing team. I will be assisting the team today with the webinar as moderator. We will give it another 30 to 60 seconds to allow all the attendees to join us. Great. I think we can start. Welcome to our next webinar in the Cohesive Maximo Back to Basics webinar series. Our aim for this webinar series is to highlight existing base Maximo functionality and features that your organization may not be using today to help you maximize your return on investment. We will be presenting this content in the Maximo application suite to give you an opportunity to see MAS and specifically the managed application. Our focus for this series will be on functional topics with plans to incorporate more technical topics in the future. Note that this webinar will be recorded and distributed post-webinar. All the attendees are currently set to listen-only mode, but feel free to post any questions or comments in the chat or question box. Should you have any technical questions or problems, please log it with the GoToWebinar technical team in the form of a question mark or help section on the panel itself. I will be handing you over to the host in a bit, but let me do a quick introduction. Cohesive helps owner-operators embed digital ways of working that drive operational efficiency and enhance asset performance across all stages of the lifecycle. We at Cohesive draw on core tech solutions to support our clients. These solutions include Bentley's Infrastructure Cloud, iTwin, and IBM Maximo, for which Cohesive is the largest implementer. Our speaker for today is Petra Arnold Bowen, a project manager and services manager at Cohesive with over 11 years in the oil and gas software space, as well as over 6 years of Maximo experience. Without further ado, let's dive in and hand over to our host. Petra, over to you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to walk us through safety plans in Maximo Manage. So our agenda for today, we will talk a little bit about what safety plans are in the context of Maximo and why, as an organization, you would want to use safety plans. Then we'll get into creating a safety plan in Maximo and then using or how you apply that safety plan to the different modules. Then we'll have time for a quick demonstration in Manage so I can show you what creating a safety plan looks like in MAS. And then at the end, we'll have some time for question and answers. So just hang on to your questions if you have any, or I think you can type them into the question box too as the presentation is going. All right, so working with safety plans. What are safety plans in Maximo? In Maximo or Manage, and I'm going to end up using those terms interchangeably. Essentially, they mean the same thing, just depends what version of Maximo you are on. But in Manage, a safety plan is designed to hold the information needed to safely perform work on a work order. Safety plans is its own application, but it is comprised of 4 main units. So hazards and precautions, hazardous materials, and lockout tagout information. You are going to hear those four terms a lot throughout this presentation. So by the end, you'll have it drilled into your head what exactly a safety plan is comprised of. Each of these elements helps define the safety plan and signify to the worker what they need to be aware of when working on a particular asset or location. Hazards detail the safety risks of working on an asset or location. Precautions explain how to mitigate those risks. And lockout tagout procedures further reduce or eliminate the hazards while working on an asset or in a particular location. Safety information such as hazards and precautions can be associated to assets and locations, which we'll get into a little bit later. And then safety plans themselves can also be associated to job plans, work orders, and rotating items. Hazards can also be assigned to an item in the item master. So again, we'll go through all of those different things throughout this presentation. Safety plans can be used across multiple assets or locations, or can be very specific to a single asset or a location. For instance, you could have a generic safety plan that can be used on multiple work orders for similar assets or locations. But if a given location or asset requires specific changes, Maximo will allow you to personalize the safety plan for that asset. On the screen here, we just have a screenshot of what the safety plan application looks like in Manage. So why, as an organization, would you want to use safety plans in Maximo? The objective of a safety plan is to get the right people, the right safety information on the right work order with the right PPE, and make the employees that will perform the work aware of the precautions, hazards, and procedures needed to perform the work safely. Obviously, at the end of the day, you want your employees leaving the workplace and going home to their family injury-free. Safety plans are designed to provide the information to help create a workplace where people are aware of the hazards associated with the work they are performing and how they must protect themselves and those around them before initiating any kind of work. So first and foremost, it's all about safety and the safety of your workers. Some other potential benefits, though, of including safety plans in your managed implementation are as follows. To help you and your employees maintain compliance with safety standards and assure compliance with regulations in your industry. So if you have very specific regulations or safety standards, safety plans can be a way to incorporate that into Manage. Safety plans also help ensure and provide consistent information for working safely on assets and helps ensure the same information is repeated on each work order so that all workers are aware of the associated dangers and hazards. Putting all of your safety plans into Maximo also allows you to create a library of safety plans that can then be referenced on all sorts of objects, such as assets, locations, job plans, rotating items, and items. You can view all of your safety plans in one place, and then you can easily duplicate or modify your safety plans as needed. So essentially, this keeps all of your safety information in one place, and this can be particularly helpful in the situation of an audit, for example, and you need to be able to produce or show where you've kept all of your safety plan information. Finally, as we've talked about, safety plans are used to inform employees of the hazards, precautions, and lockout tagout processes related to the work they are performing. But it also allows you to include very specific information, such as what PPE they should be using, additional information related to the material safety data sheets, as well as additional permits necessary to mitigate the hazards so employees can perform the work safely by considering the hazards present. Safety plans take the guesswork out of doing safe work, and what you need to protect yourself is clearly laid out in each work order. All right, so creating a safety plan in Maximo. Within Maximo Manage, you will navigate to the safety plan application by going to the planning module. And then further kind of hidden, you have this little safety submodule, and that's where you're going to find safety plans. This is available just out of the box base Maximo. So everyone should have access to it. You just might need to have the permission turned on if you don't currently see it in your system today. But so we have safety plans here. You'll also notice that there are different applications for hazards, precautions, lockout, tagout. And that is because those are the building blocks of a safety plan. So you need to set up your data for hazards, precautions, lockout, tagout before you actually set up your safety plan, or else your safety plan isn't going to have very much information in it. Another thing to notice in this screenshot, you'll see there's kind of a duplication of applications, and that's just because this environment that we used also had an industry add-on for oil and gas. And oil and gas, the industry add-on for oil and gas gives you a little bit more functionality for safety plans than just the out-of-the-box version. All right, so in this example, I've clicked on my safety plans application, and you can see the safety plan screen, and I've created a new record. So safety plans is comprised of 4 tabs: your main tab, hazards and precautions tab, hazardous materials, and then your tagout or lockout tagout tab. You can, when you're creating your safety plan, you can choose if you want to include just hazards and precautions, just hazardous materials, just tagouts, or you can include a combination of each. It's really up to you and what the safety plan needs in order to suit the requirements. However, as I said, it's important to make sure you have set up that foundational data for hazards, hazardous materials, etc., before you go and try to create your safety plan, or else it's going to take you a lot longer to create it. All right, so let's talk about what each of the tabs does. Your first tab, safety plan, includes a code for the safety plan field. So this is actually going to be your unique identifier. So I would highly recommend, before you start putting in a bunch of safety plans, that you come up with some kind of naming convention for your safety plan code field, because once you save, that field is going to become read-only and you can't edit it. So you want to make sure you have some kind of convention going so that you can tell from the code what the safety plan is referring to. Also have a field for a description, long description, and then you have a table for work assets. And your work assets table is going to be where you associate what assets and locations are specific or are associated with this safety plan. You'll notice that the safety plan tab doesn't actually have a status. So as soon as you save your safety plan, it's going to be active and it's going to be selectable. So keep that in mind as well. This also means that you can edit the safety plan at any time without having to deactivate it or set it to a different status, like what is somewhat common with some of our other applications within Maximo. So at any time you can add additional hazards and precautions, you can add additional work assets, and you can also remove assets. So for example, if you needed to delete a work asset, you would just use the delete icon. And that is just going to delete the work asset from your safety plan. It's not actually deleting the asset, as we know. It's just removing it from this table. But a situation where you might want to remove an asset or a location is if that asset, for example, has become retired from service or otherwise decommissioned. You might want to remove it from the safety plans it's applicable to, just so that it doesn't, just because it's no longer applicable. In the work assets table itself, you can have both assets and locations referenced on a safety plan. However, you'll notice that assets and locations each need to have their own line in the table. So if you add a row that has an asset, that location field is going to become read-only because you cannot have both a location and an asset reference on one line. So if you want to also add a location, you would just add a new row. These fields are considered mutually exclusive, and it has a similar behavior on the job plan, which we'll see in a little bit. Another important piece of information is that safety plans are site level objects and require entry of a site when creating. So your default insert site from your user profile is going to default onto the record when you create your safety plan. If you are a multi-site implementation and you need to create a safety plan for more than one site, you will need to first change your default insert site in your user profile, and then come in and create your safety plan for that site, then change it in your profile again for the next site, and so on and so forth. So once you have all that base information entered onto the screen, you would move on to your hazards and precautions tab. So the hazards and precautions tab displays all of the hazards and their associated precautions identified for the safety plan and the related asset and location if you choose to enter some in that table. I should note you do not actually have to put in a work asset or a work location in the table if you are just creating a very generic safety plan. Excuse me. So as discussed, there is a hazards application and a precautions application in Manage. Hazards and precautions are created in their respective applications prior to adding them onto the safety plan. Precautions are then associated to a hazard within the hazards application. So not within the safety plan, but within the actual hazards application itself. So when you're adding a hazard onto the screen, you're only going to see precautions that have already been associated to that hazard within the hazards application. So when you come into this tab, you hit New Row to add your hazard, and you select from your list of hazards that exist. And once that hazard is selected, if it has any precautions defined for it, it will show in this table down here. You'll notice there is no new row for the precautions table, again, because this is a relationship already built, so you can't add new precautions. In our example here, you'll see we have heat 1, which is a temperature from 100 Fahrenheit to 400 Fahrenheit is our hazard. And because it's selected, it's showing its related precaution, which is to wear gloves. If you notice that your hazard that you're trying to add has the incorrect precaution or doesn't have enough precautions or whatever the case may be, if you need to make any changes, you need to go and do that in the hazards and precautions applications first. So update your hazard with the right precautions and then come back into your safety plan and re-add that hazard so you can see the applicable or the correct precautions display in the table. You can also, of course, at any time, add or delete hazards as necessary from the table just using the delete icon. Again, it's just going to delete your hazard from the table. It's not deleting your hazard from the system. So while, if you remember, safety plans and precautions are site level objects, but hazards themselves are an organizational level object, as hazards can be associated to an item. So if you have a hazard that you want the same precaution for each site added to it, you must create that precaution for all of the sites you need it for, and then add each site-specific precaution to the hazard. So just, again, something to keep in mind, really only comes into play if you have a multi-site implementation, but it's something to be aware of. Our next tab is our hazardous materials tab, and this includes any hazard that is classified as a hazardous material. Again, the source data for hazardous material is created within the hazards application itself. Within the hazards application, and I will show you this in the demo, there is a toggle that will let you determine whether or not a hazard should be classified as a hazardous material. This toggle, which can have hazardous materials, must be checked in order for the hazard to be selectable on the hazardous materials tab. So from this table within the safety plan application. A hazard that does not have this toggle checked in the hazards application is therefore not considered a hazardous material, but it is still a hazard. Toggling the can have hazardous materials to on will also open up an additional section in the hazards application that lets you add some information about the hazardous material, such as health risk, flammability, reactivity, and reactivity ratings. If the can have precautions toggle is toggled on for your hazardous material, so you're saying the hazardous material also has precautions, the hazardous material will also display in the hazards and precautions tab of the safety plans application if you've chosen it as a hazardous material. So you'll notice on the hazardous materials tab, there is no separate table for precautions. So if any of the hazardous materials that you have added to your table, here also have precautions associated with them, they will also then show up on your hazards and precautions tab. So to summarize, hazardous materials are essentially just a subset of hazards that can store additional information related to the hazardous material, and it can also have their own set of precautions. Same functionality here though, you just use the new row icon, select from your hazardous materials. Your pop-up is only going to show you those hazards that have been identified as hazardous materials, and then you can select them to add. Excuse me. All right, so let's look at the last tab of our safety plan, which is tagout or lockout tagout tab. And this is the last kind of building block of a safety plan. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with what a lockout tagout procedure is, but if you're not, these are intended to eliminate the risks associated with a hazard, and lockout operations must be performed in exactly the order specified prior to work being started. So it's essentially a procedure that you must follow before performing any work on an asset or a location to make sure you've tagged out or locked out the hazard. You use the lockout tagout application to create a tagout set of procedures. The tagout procedures is a series of steps which are called lockout operations. Lockout operations can apply to an asset, a location, a locking device, or even an activity that is not associated to a particular device or an asset. So similar to what we saw with hazards and precautions and hazardous materials, this is information you need to have already set up in your tagout application prior to trying to add it onto your safety plan. This tab also works a little bit differently than the other two in that first you must identify the hazard that you are locking out. So you would come into the hazards table, hit new row, and then select the hazard that you're locking out. Then if you have your relationship set up properly, so on your tagout procedure, you would identify what asset and what hazard the lockout is um, associated to. And when you have that relation set up properly, if you add the hazard, Maximo will automatically add any associated tagouts to that hazard, as well as what the lockout tagout operation actually is, as defined in your system. You can add as many as you need to on this tab, but we've kept it simple with just one. This is the actual tagout procedure. Sorry, this is the tagout. This is just what the tagout is called, and then this is the procedure for the tagout. Okay, so now we've set up our safety plan, and we want to go about actually applying that safety plan to the modules in Maximo. So probably the most common way to associate a safety plan to a work order is doing it through a job plan. So for those of you who are familiar with the job plan application, that's what you're currently seeing on screen. First tab is your job plan tab, and then the second tab is your work assets tab. On the work assets tab, we have the work assets and safety plans table, as you can see here in the screenshot. It allows you to identify a location, asset, or an item, and then what safety plan is applicable for that particular location or asset. So some important things to keep note of when you're setting up this relationship on a job plan. You can only have one default safety plan for a work asset, for a particular work asset on a job plan. Multiple work assets can exist on the job plan, but only the default is going to flow through to the work order automatically. And if you don't specify a default job plan, no safety plan is going to flow through to the work order from the job plan. So in this picture here, you see this toggle denotes whether or not it is the default safety plan for that particular location or asset for this job plan. You also can have multiple lines for a single work asset. So in our example, you see two lines for the rotating item pump 100. In this scenario, we've selected one safety plan as the default. So the first one, our safety plan major SB2, is the default for pump 100. And then we've also added another row for the exact same rotating item, which has a different safety plan associated, but it is not the default. You could also choose in this scenario to not default any safety plan. And that just means that when this job plan is applied against this rotating item, there isn't going to be a safety plan that is automatically applied to the work order, but you will have the option to pick between these two safety plans to decide which one you want to apply. For each line in the work assets and safety plans tab, there are columns for location, asset, and item, like I said. Important to note here though, this item field is for rotating items only. not items from your item master per se, but just rotating items. You can enter either a location, an asset, or a rotating item on each line, but only one of these columns can have a value for each line, as the fields are mutually exclusive, like we saw on the work assets table in our safety plan application. All right, so once you have your job plan set up with your safety plans identified, you would then go into your work order application and apply that job plan. So most of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with your work order application. There is a section on your work order main tab called job details, and then there's a place to select your job plan and to select a safety plan. If the job plan selected has a default safety plan for the work order's location, asset, or rotating item, that safety plan will be pulled onto the work order and displayed on the safety plans tab. So that's those relationships we just created on the previous slide in the job plans application. When you pull that job plan, it's going to look at your asset or location, see if it matches with any of the work assets that have been defined on the job plan. And then if it has been, it'll pull in the safety plan if there's a default. If the job plan has no safety plan and you enter a safety plan, it will then be applied to the work order and reflected in the safety plan tab. The safety plan field's select value pop-up has 3 buttons to help you filter through your safety plans based on different criteria, which is really helpful when you're trying to select a safety plan from hundreds of records. So we'll get more into that on the next slide. But again, if your job plan doesn't have a default, you can go into your safety plan field, hit your select value, and pick which one you want to apply to this work order. You can also update the safety plan that defaults from a job plan on your work order. Once you've set up your job plan, and if there is a safety plan here, you would just again come in to your select value, pick the safety plan you actually want to default, and then when you save, Maximo is going to ask you if you want to override the safety plan from the default job plan, and you just say yes, and then the changes will be reflected on your safety plan tab. Conversely, if you've entered a safety plan before you add a job plan, you can decide to add a job plan. If you decide to add a job plan, the system will give you a message letting you know that adding the job plan will cause the safety plan to be set to null. So you want to be careful about what order you're doing this in. You don't want to get your safety plan all set up and ready to go and then add a job plan and Maximo just erases everything. So really focus on job plan, safety plan as the order of inputting information. You can also enter a safety plan in the safety plan field on the work order, even if there is no job plan. So you don't need a job plan. You can select a safety plan at any time as long as that safety plan is set up for the asset or location that your work order is working on. It's just a job plan obviously makes it less of a manual task, and the defaulting saves a lot of time in the long run. So this is what I was talking about. This is what pops up when you hit the select value icon on your safety plan field. It automatically has these 3 filters, again, because realistically, you're going to have hundreds or even thousands of safety plans. So Maximo is trying to give you a way to help filter through that information a little bit easier. The first toggle or the first radio button, show all safety plans, is going to show just that, all of your safety plans that you have in the system. So when in doubt, use this option. If you just simply can't find the safety plan you're looking for, just show all of them. Then you can also filter through this table like you can any other table in Maximo using your filter icon and searching capabilities. If you choose the second option, which is show safety plans for the current work order, this will filter your list to the safety plans that have the location or asset on the work order as a safety plan work asset. So if you remember on our safety plan, on the safety plan application, you have a work assets table. If you select this option, it's going to show you all of the safety plans where your current asset or location for your work order is also listed as a work asset on the safety plan. Finally, the last option, show safety plans for the job plan of the current work order. This will filter your results to show the safety plans associated with the current job plan, further filtered by asset or location of the work order. So this is your most narrow option. It's going to show you all of the safety plans for your current job plan where the asset or location of this work order have been identified. So most broad to most narrow. Again, when in doubt, use the first option. So within the work order application itself, this is the safety plans tab. It is going to look very similar to what safety plans or what the safety plans application looks like. So you have your hazards and precautions tab, hazardous materials, and your lockout tagouts. Some important things to note about this tab: a work order can only have one safety plan, and it will exist obviously on the safety plan tab, but you can modify any safety plan that defaults to the work order while planning the work. So if you have a safety plan that's defaulted from a job plan, great. But if you need to make some tweaks to it, you can. So you can add additional hazards, hazardous materials, etc. You can also build a safety plan for the work order on this tab in its entirety. So you can build it completely from scratch, but that's just going to create a safety plan for this work order, and it's not actually going to add that safety plan to your safety plan library. So if it's something that's repeatable, you probably want to set it up as a safety plan first, so you're not constantly having to rebuild it every time on the work order. Keep in mind, if you build your safety plan from scratch on this tab, it's good practice to do so after you've selected the job plan. Because as we saw, if you choose a job plan after you've created your safety plan, it could wipe all of the information that you have added onto your safety plan. So it will get rid of all that information. So make sure you're selecting your job plan first if your work order is going to use a job plan. There is, in terms of editability of this tab, there is an organizational setting out of the box. And by default, I believe it's set to only allow modification of this tab when the work order is in Whopper status, but you can change it to be editable to whatever status you want or that is required by your organization. Probably makes sense to make it not editable much farther after the planning stage, because you don't want people coming in here and accidentally deleting hazards, but you do have that option if you need to. So you can also obviously apply a safety plan through a PM, so through a preventative maintenance record. For those of you who are familiar with the PM application, you'll probably know that there is no safety plan field like there is on the job plan. So the way to apply a safety plan from a PM is to first set up that safety plan on your job plan and then pull that job plan onto your preventative maintenance record. So when your PM generates, it'll look at the job plan, it'll look at what asset or location it's generating for, and if it finds a match for a safety plan record from the job plan, it'll pull that safety plan onto your work order. So pretty standard Maximo functionality with that. Okay, so we've talked a lot about safety plans themselves. Maximo also allows you to associate that safety information in different areas and in different modules without truly creating a safety plan. So one of those examples would be in your assets and locations applications. So right now on the screen, you'll see we are in assets. And within the assets application, you have a safety tab. And when you click on it, again, it's going to look very similar to how the safety plan application looks with your hazards and precautions, hazardous materials, lockout, tagout tabs. So on this tab, you can associate all of the hazards and precautions, hazardous materials, etc. for the asset that you're currently on. But it's important to know you're not actually creating a safety plan. What you're really doing is just saying, is basically just a dump of all of the information that is associated to this asset, particularly the hazards and precautions. And it's going to make your lives easier if you set up the data this way first, because then when you go and create your safety plan, you have an option to see what's already been associated to that asset and pull it onto the safety plan. So it is a bit of a time saver when creating the safety plan itself. You'll also notice within the assets application on the safety tab, you have this additional tab that we don't actually have on the safety plan application, and it's called safety related assets. So the safety related assets tab appears only on the safety tab of the asset or location record. And what it is a list of assets or locations that may have a safety impact to take into consideration while performing work on your current asset. So you're basically creating kind of a safety relationship or a safety hierarchy by adding additional assets onto this tab. The purpose of creating this relationship is to aid the safety planner when creating the safety plan. When creating a safety plan, you have the option to use an action. So from the left-hand side menu in safety plans, there's an action called select hazards. Using this action will show you all of the hazards you've associated to an asset, as well as the safety-related assets and their hazards that have been associated. So when your safety planner is trying to create a safety plan for this asset, they can use that action. And rather than starting from scratch and having to try to remember what all of the hazards are that are associated with this asset, it'll give them a list that you've already set up here, as well as any of the safety-related assets and their hazards. All right, finally, one other area of Maximo that uses some of this safety functionality is within the item master itself. So as I have said previously, you can associate a hazard to an item. But again, we are not creating a safety plan. We are just adding a hazard to a particular item. So you do this within the item master application, and you perform this activity using the action items and organizations, and it'll pop up this little pop-up, and it gives you this field to say which hazards are associated with this item. So for example, if you have an item like a car battery that has acid in it, you can identify that hazard on the item so that the hazard is included in the safety plan on the work order when that item is added on the planning tab of the work order. So again, the idea is giving your workers information that the item they are handling has a potential hazard, so they can take the necessary precautions. All right, so to summarize, hopefully you can now appreciate that there are several ways to create a safety plan in Maximo. The first and most obvious way is to create a new safety plan using the safety plans application. You can then duplicate or modify an existing safety plan as a starting point for your new safety plan. Once you have your safety plan created, you would add it to a job plan for a particular asset or location, and then add that job plan to your work order. On the work order, you can choose whether or not you want to use the default safety plan. You can select a new one, or you can even create one from scratch within the safety plans tab of the work order. Whichever way you choose to create and apply your safety plans will obviously depend on the situation and your business processes, but at the end of the day, there is no right or wrong way, as long as the correct safety information is getting pulled onto the correct work orders before your workers begin work. So out of the box, you can really use safety plans right away. There isn't any configuration that needs to happen. Obviously, the biggest time commitment is getting all of the right data, so all of your hazards and precautions, etc., into Maximo, creating your safety plans, and then making sure you've associated those safety plans to the correct assets and locations, as well as job plans if you're planning on going that route. But it is a worthwhile effort to make sure that all of your safety information is displayed in Maximo and your workers know what they are dealing with on a work order. Okay, so now we will get into our demo here. Just give me one moment. I will pull up Manage. And this is our demo environment, so it's a little bit slow, so just a little bit of patience. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Mass, this is what it looks like. So I've logged into Mass as my user, and I am into the Manage application, which is what you know as Maximo today. Obviously, it looks a little bit different. The skin's a little bit different, but the functionality is exactly the same for the most part. Okay, so like I said, to get to the safety plans application, you go under planning, and then under planning, there's this further submodule called safety, and you have all of your different safety applications. Safety plans is what we're going to be using, and these are the other applications to set up information relevant to your safety plan. So in the safety plans application, you hit new row to create a new record, or I guess new record. And you'll notice there's only one required field on a safety plan. Again, it's the unique identifier field. So make sure you've come up with a naming convention prior to setting up your safety plans, because once we save, this is going to become read-only. Our example, we are going to be setting up a safety plan for a boiler condensate return motor. Condensate, I can't talk and type at the same time. My default insert site is Bedford, and it defaults. And then we have our work assets table here. So I'm just going to associate one location for the sake of this demo. You can associate as many as you need, and I'll save my record. So pretty simple, easy to do. We'll move on to our hazards and precautions tab. All right, so within hazards and precautions, we have our hazards table and precautions. Again, you cannot add precautions from this view. You need to add it from, you need to associate your precaution to your hazards first. So when I hit new row on our hazards table, select value, this is a list of all of the hazards we currently have in the system. So I will pick dust. So airborne dust is our hazard, and because there is a precaution associated to dust, it is wear your respirator mask. I'll add another hazard of noise, if I can find it. So another hazard for this particular safety plan is excessive noise, and the associated precaution is to wear hearing protection. So that looks good to me. Again, this is very basic for the sake of the demo. You would probably build this out a little bit more robustly, but I don't want to bore everyone, so we'll just have two hazards. And then we'll move on to our hazardous materials tab. So you'll notice dust is already displaying on our hazardous materials tab because it is also classified. Not only is it a hazard, but it is classified as a hazardous material. So I'm actually just going to pop over to the hazards application so you can see how you set that up. So now we're in the hazards application where all of your foundational hazards information lives. Within the hazard itself, you identify if it can have precautions. So again, that's the relationship. If you toggle this to yes, your precautions tab becomes editable and you can add whatever precautions necessary. Can have hazardous materials is what is going to turn this hazard into a hazardous material and selectable from the hazardous materials tab. Also toggling this on gives you this hazardous material information section that I talked about previously. So you can just add additional information about your hazardous material. Same with tagouts, similar functionality. You need to have this toggled on if you want the hazard to be associated with a tagout. So we'll just return back into our safety plans application. We're on the hazardous materials tab. We have dust here, and you can see our NFPA ratings, National Fire Protection Agency, I think that stands for. And it has just some additional information about the ratings. So I'm happy with my one hazardous material. I'll move on to tagouts. And again, like I said previously, this screen works a little bit differently in that you first need to add your hazard that your tagout is going to be locking out. So in this example, I will use electrical shock is our hazard. You also need to associate a location, so a related location. So Maximo knows exactly which location this tagout is for because they are very specific to the location or asset. So you'll notice now, once I save, because I already have a relationship set up between this hazard and lockout tagout for this particular location, it's automatically defaulting what the tagout is, as well as what the lockout operations are, or what the procedures are. So in this example, the procedure is breaker 431 needs to be in an open state. That is the first step you need to do. And then breaker 451 also needs to be in an open state, and that needs to be done second. And then your remove sequence, so to close these, needs to be done in the reverse order. So you can make this as detailed as you need. You can pull in additional locations or assets, etc. But that is what your lockout tagout will look like. Okay, so I've created my safety plan. I'm just going to copy it, and we will go add it to a job plan. So under planning, we go into job plans. We're in a job plan application. I'm going to create a new record. And give it some information here. So repair or replace boiler condensate motor. So that's what our job plan is. So repairing or replacing a condensate motor. Obviously, you would come into your job plan details and add additional information about the actual job plan itself. So what the different tasks are for this particular job plan, any labor, materials, etc. that needs to be planned when this job plan is used. But just for the sake of time, I won't do that. But I'll move over to our work assets tab. And again, this is where we are going to add our safety plan for this particular job plan. So you hit new row. Whoops. I have already a job plan with that name. Okay, so I've hit new row. I'm going to add my location again, same location that I set up my safety plan for. And then I am going to enter my safety plan. So this is the safety plan we just set up. It's for this location. And by default, it's going to say this is the default safety plan for this location, for this job plan. I'm happy with that. You can obviously change it if you need to, but I will keep it like that. All right, just need to save. Job plans, unlike safety plans, you need to have an active status in order to use them. So I've just changed my status to active. And now we are going to go and apply this job plan onto our work order. Sorry, it's a little slow. All right, in work order tracking, we'll create a new record. So this one we will call boiler motor repair. So something's broken, it's for our location. And we'll go ahead and associate that job plan that we just created, which is to fix the motor. So you'll see once I added the job plan, Maximo pulls in that default safety plan because it's recognized that the safety plan exists on this job plan for this particular location. So if I go look at my safety plan tab, you'll see it's automatically pulled that safety plan onto the work order with all of my hazards and precautions, my hazardous materials, and my lockout tagouts for this location. So pretty nifty once you have it all the data set up. Maximo does a good job of pulling that all into the work order and saving you some time. So you don't have to go and create a new safety plan every time. That being said, if we did need to make some changes to the safety plan now, we could add additional hazards. You can add additional precautions even, and whatever else, what other changes you need to make. All right. Last thing I wanted to show you quickly is just, well, I guess I don't even need to show you, is on the preventative maintenance record, you would just associate that same job plan that we just used on your PM record. And when it generates a work order, it'll pull the safety plan on. Okay, I believe that's everything I wanted to show in the demo. So really, again, like I said, the hardest part or the most time intensive part about all of this is just setting up the data and creating the relationships. But once you have that all set up, actually applying it to work orders in Maximo is pretty flawless. So there's a lot of great functionality available out of the box that you can use without even needing to get help or make any significant configurations. Okay, I will turn it back to you. Oops. Back to you, LK.
Thank you, Petra. For you, our attendees, please make note of our upcoming webinar on the 19th of December, which will be on working with the company's application, where you will get a deep dive into both the company's and company master applications, and where we will also teach you on how to optimize your vendor and manufacturer management within Maximo. Explore industry best practices and highlight how these applications provide valuable information to other applications. Right, we have time for some questions from the chat box. Can you talk about the risk and risk assessment sections in planning?
In planning, well, it's short answer is no, just because we don't have enough time. That's a whole nother beast on its own. But essentially, what you can do is set up risk assessments and a risk matrix under those different applications and apply them to different areas of Maximo. That's probably, if we don't already have it scheduled, a webinar on its own, but it is a fairly lengthy process to discuss. But again, at a very high level, you can create those records and then apply it to different areas of Maximo, like your work orders or even your incidents and investigations and that sort of thing. So maybe we should actually write that down as a topic for an upcoming webinar.
I think it would be good. And then, are safety plans available with base Maximo? Do I need an industry add-on?
Yes, so like I said, it is available with base Maximo. If you have the industry add-on oil and gas, it gives you a little bit more functionality within the different applications. So hazards and precautions, you have the opportunity to enter additional information that's a little bit more specific to oil and gas, but just base regular Maximo is going to give you all of the functionality that we looked at today.
Awesome. And then lastly, are safety plans viewable on Maximo Mobile?
Yes, they are. So Maximo Mobile will let you see the hazards. So within a work order, Maximo Mobile will let you see the hazards associated with the work order, the precautions, even the safety plan. So yes, short answer is they are available on Maximo Mobile.
Great. Thank you so much. With that, we can conclude our webinar. I want to again thank our speaker for joining us today, as well as you, our attendees, for being here. Reach out to our presenter or the team at Cohesive via our website or via LinkedIn. Note we have all the previous webinars available on YouTube. The recording of this webinar will also be made available to you on our channel. That is a wrap for today's webinar, but please register and join us for our upcoming webinar on December 19th. Petra, thank you again, and I wish everyone a great day.
Thank you.